Despite the anticipation for Breath of the Wild sequel, Nintendo has been dead silent about the upcoming game since the release of the announcement trailer. With Zelda's 35th anniversary coming up, we're getting the feeling that something may be coming soon. So we've taken the time to reflect on the first Breath of the Wild to find 9 things that we'd want to see from the upcoming sequel. If you want to stay on top of the latest Breath of the Wild news, make sure to like and subscribe because we'll be on it as soon as anything drops. Partnerable Zelda. Can we not have Zelda as a damsel in distress anymore? Wouldn't it be cool to just fight alongside her in a more cooperative experience? While the Nintendo Online system isn't the greatest, Nintendo has generally been good about having adventures together with friends with games like Luigi's Mansion 3, so Zelda and Link side by side out in the open world sounds like a dream come true. Other ideas like having an AI-controlled Zelda fight alongside you, an outright playable Zelda instead of Link, or even controlling both characters simultaneously a la Astral Chain would be interesting additions. Just make her more involved somehow. More traditional Zelda items. Bomb Chews, the Gale Boomerang, hookshots, and so many traditional Zelda equipment pieces will be interesting additions to the Breath of the Wild sequel. We appreciate the effort that went into adding callback items to the original Breath of the Wild, such as the Big Goron Sword and the Twilight Bow, but Zelda fans are hungry and we always want more. Nero mechanics? While outright Devil May Cry combat mechanics in a mainline Zelda game would be a bit too much, this new arm-possessed Link gives me some serious Nero vibes. I'm hoping that the arm has some grappling abilities for exploration, puzzling, and combat, because that would be outright awesome. And in the same vein as some Zelda equipment that should return, a spiritual successor to the hookshot would be more than welcome. More traditional Zelda dungeons. We wouldn't want to replace shrines, far from it, but we're hoping the main dungeon contain more of what made the original Zelda so memorable. Maps, compasses, keys, unique bosses, maybe even specific dungeon items? While the Divine Beasts were great, they really just felt like giant shrines, and since the Divine Beasts are presumably conquered, now is the time for dungeons. Bigger emphasis on story. Despite everything Breath of the Wild did well, its story really took a back seat, especially towards the end. A toe was dipped into this with Age of Calamity, and we feel like it could be even better. Because the game was so focused on allowing you to tell your own adventure and do anything in any order, there was little room for the characters and story to grow. And since collecting all the memories were an optional part of Breath of the Wild, some players missed out on even more context to the story. Now that we're onto the sequel, we're hoping the game decides to put more of an emphasis on the story and its characters, allowing them to fully develop throughout the course of the game. This might mean making the story more linear, but if the rest of the game is still open, then we think this won't be too much of a compromise, especially if the story is good. Nintendo has proven in the past with titles such as Wind Waker and Skyward Sword that there are some great stories to be told in the Zelda universe, and with Breath of the Wild specifically, there's so much more to Zelda, Link, and their relationship. So the sequel seems like the best place to do this. Explore new areas outside of Hyrule, or a different version. Hyrule in Breath of the Wild is massive and a great place to truly express a sense of freedom the game gives you. But if you're exploring the same area in the sequel, how will that work for people who have poured hundreds of hours into the original? That sense of discovery would be gone. We're hoping that Breath of the Wild 2 has some sort of Termina or Koholint Island if it does take place in the same Hyrule. Or, at the very least, has a Dark World or some sort of low rule variant, where things are mostly the same but slightly different. Swimming upgrades. As much as the ground and air movement was an astounding feat in Breath of the Wild, I felt like swimming was somewhat of an afterthought. It was fairly clunky to move quickly and there wasn't a dive option. And we know the developers put so much effort into making Breath of the Wild's environment so beautiful, even unexplorable areas such as Lurelin Village's Bay. So why weren't we able to explore it? You don't even have to let us fully dive. Even the good old Iron Boots method would be an interesting addition. Return the Dark Nut. There are plenty of colorful other enemies in the Zelda series that should make a showing in the Breath of the Wild sequel, but our personal vouch is for the return of Dark Nuts. Lynels were an amazing challenge in Breath of the Wild, but a good old-fashioned tough one-on-one duel with metal-on-metal action is something that would bring a tear to my eye. In both Twilight Princess and Wind Waker, they're one of our favorite enemies to fight. Pet dogs. Enough said, if we can't pet dogs in the sequel, it's basically unplayable. In all seriousness though, the dogs are pretty darn cute, and the feed for treasure mechanic was cool, but just let me pet the good boys. They deserve it. So, there you have it. We're so excited for the Breath of the Wild sequel that we just can't stop thinking about it. What do you guys want to see in Breath of the Wild 2? Let us know in the comments below, and stay tuned for GameSpot for any future updates on Breath of the Wild 2.